So if you look at any study on longevity, you'll see that one thing is key: community. Its presence can extend life, both the length and the quality of it. Its absence can shorten it. Loneliness in particular is becoming a key factor in the world today, with the World Health Organization calling it a critical health issue, and the US Surgeon General equating it to smoking at least 15 cigarettes a day. So with that in mind, if I asked you, what are your keys of life? What would your answer be? Well, today my guest has asked just that question. Group CEO of Orascom Development, Omar El Hamamsy, who has just completed a major study with Orascom Development around community, what that means to us, and how important it is. Omar, welcome to the Mental Space Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be with you.
So, it's a big question, but why did Orascom Development begin this quest to try and find out what community means to people?
It's a very important element for Orascom Development to build communities, which we've been doing over the last 35 years. And we've been doing it in so many different environments, so many different countries. So just maybe to take a step back and give the broader context. Orascom Development was started in Egypt 35 years ago in a small, beautiful coastal area of the Red Sea, which today has evolved into a fully integrated, sustainable town called El Gouna. Since then, over the last 35 years, we've developed 11 such sustainable, integrated towns in absolutely magical places. We're in 7 different countries, 3 in Europe, England, Switzerland, and Montenegro, 2 in North Africa, Morocco and Egypt, and then 2 in the GCC, Oman and the UAE. And we've developed, and we're operating and growing 11 such towns in those 7 countries. Now, when we take a step back and we think about what really makes a town, we're not in the business of just building a compound in an existing city, right? We tend to pick those locations in absolutely marvelous settings. They can be on the Red Sea, on the Indian Ocean in Oman, on the Adriatic in Montenegro, in the mountains in Switzerland, in the Swiss Alps, really nice places. They tend to be isolated at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So when we start any one of those towns, it's literally, 20, 30, 50 kilometers away from the nearest kind of existing agglomeration of people, if you will. And therefore, it's absolutely critical for us that these are not just hardware, if you will, projects. So we're not just simply putting houses and hotels and marinas and ski slopes and schools and all that, but that we're putting the software element in it. And that's the magic of community, right? Now, you can build communities and let them grow organically. But what we've discovered over the 35-year period is that there are some elements of community that are absolutely essential ingredients and that differentiate, towns that thrive and continue growing from towns that are, how should I say, a bit more static or perhaps have less soul in them. Our founder is somebody who's very passionate about design, very passionate about life. Our motto, therefore, is life as it should be, and we really live it and believe it. And therefore, very recently, about a year or so ago, we decided we're going to launch a global initiative to try to take a step back and to look at the communities that we've built and to talk to people around the globe. We've surveyed 3,600 people around the globe to try to understand, what does community mean for them, right? And today we're launching a second edition of this Keys of Life initiative, as we call it, based on all these different surveys. And we're trying to extract as many insights as we possibly can from all of that. Some of them are very obvious, and I'm sure we'll talk about them. Some of them are a little bit more interesting and insightful, I guess, and we're discovering them as we go along. And therefore, our goal ultimately as Orascom Development in our 11 communities is, how do we actually then take those keys of life, really like keys to success for a rich, healthy, well-balanced community, and replicate them, or at least catalyze them, maybe is a better word than replicate, because you don't control culture or community or soul. You don't control these things. You can't just simply make them happen. But you can catalyze them, you can enable them, you can sow enough seeds in your different communities to ensure that some elements of those keys of life will catch on and will develop over time.
So you got, Orascom Development have been doing this a while now.
Yeah.
And then you've launched this study a year ago. What surprised you? Because you've been on this road for a while now. You've been learning lessons with every project that you've finished, with every town that you've built. What stood out, or what surprised you in this report, when people were talking about their keys of life?
Yeah. I'll answer the question in two different ways. Okay. There's stuff that I think we've all come to realize, but we haven't necessarily always put some hard numbers behind post-COVID, right? So I'll talk about some of these areas that I feel, we intuitively felt post-COVID, and then I'll talk about maybe a couple of things that surprise us. The stuff that doesn't surprise us anymore is the fact that people genuinely post-COVID, I think, want to get to a strong extent have the freedom to go out of large monolithic cities into more nature-oriented, nature-balanced parts where they can, or towns, or communities where they can work, where they can live, where they can play. So that's perhaps theme number one, and we've seen that very clearly in the statistics and the answers that we got. The second thing that I think was really interesting is this, I wouldn't say discovery, but this increasing number or segment of digital or non-digital nomads. So people who decide that, look, I want to go live here for 3 or 4 months because the weather, because the activities, because the cultural events, etc., are attractive to me. And then I want to do another 3-4 months in some other country, some other community, some other environment, etc. And they keep rotating. So those nomads, be they digital or not, I think that's another very strong trend that we've seen come out of those reports, and certainly post-COVID has been happening increasingly. And it obviously in some cases may go a little bit with some level of tension with large corporations that are saying to their employees, look, we want you back in the office. So there'll be a natural, I think, and a healthy debate and discussion around that, and eventually we'll land somewhere where probably it's somewhere in between. There's good and bad in each of these.
Yeah.
The part that perhaps surprised me a little bit more is one where still that feeling of loneliness that people have still does exist, and it's pretty strong, especially in the younger segments. So people between 18 and 24 years of age, even if they live in larger physical communities and larger physical cities, you actually don't necessarily get the sense that this level of loneliness that they have is decreasing, but quite the opposite actually. The level, I think, between the digital lives that people lead, the stress levels that they have on different jobs that they have, and I think also the post-COVID effect that they've had in the inability to form real social connections and interactions during their end of their school year, university years, etc., has still continued with a lot of them. And therefore, one of the interesting statistics that we found here is this whole wave factor, right? So, to what extent do people get to wave at their neighbors or a stranger on the street or in their communities, etc.? And it's a really interesting correlation or inverse correlation between how many times you've done this in the past year versus how lonely do you really feel. And you really see it with different age groups, and you see that very strong correlation.
I was reading the statistics, and it seems like, while our young people may be enjoying the fruits of living in a vibrant inner city, in some respects, convenience, open all hours, 24. There's a big sort of concern about noise, about that pace of life. but then also that loneliness as well. I mean, it was very much the young people who can't do this, can't look each other in the eye, can't wave and smile at the neighbor. How important do you think, because that's kind of like almost like an intangible thing, isn't it? I mean, how often would you see waving at a neighbor in a piece of research? But how integral is that into creating community? And why is that so important to you at Orascom?
Yeah, you're right. You know, honestly, that's the one part that surprised me, and it surprised me in the sense that it's genuinely interesting to put I wouldn't say a number, it's not a number in this case, but to put an action to have a proxy for loneliness or not. And I think that's, you know, this waving factor is a really interesting one. Why is it important for us, and how do we, you know, why is it important for us in our communities? It's really essential because ultimately when you think about it, we're starting communities that are extremely diverse, right? So if you take any of our communities and you look at the number of nationalities that you have there, if you look at the socioeconomic even background that makes up people who live in our communities, and we really try to make them integrated in a healthy way rather than all these dystopian kind of views that you see of large cities where the segregation, you know, is very real, and it puts a lot of stress and pressure, etc., on people on both sides, frankly, of the spectrum in those communities. So we have diverse nationalities, we have diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, and we also have diverse work activities that people do, right? So you'll have your techno nomad sitting next to the person who works on fixing boats, sitting next to the person who's here simply because he's a kite surfer for a living. I mean, one of the aspects that I have most fun with in Guna is that, you know, we have living there a young lady who's in her early 20s, who's the number 1 or number 2 global kite surfer. And she's been living in that community for basically her whole life, right? She grew up in that community. She lives in that community. So the diverse aspects of the people, what they do, the age groups, the nationalities, that she happens to be a Swedish Belgian, right? I mean, living in Egypt on the Red Sea and world champion of kite surfing. I mean, you know, so that richness of that community, right? And that diversity makes it really essential that people come together in some form, right? That you have that, as you said, this intangible or difficult to feel or measure sense of being together, of having, in some ways, I wouldn't say a common purpose because it's not necessarily a common purpose, but a common agreement on what the norms and what represents a good contribution to the community is. And so just finding those elements in there, and what makes us ultimately as human beings very close to each other, so that, as I said, that digital nomad who may be here only in transit for 3 or 4 months, and maybe they do this, you know, every year for the same season or a different season, versus the person who grew up there for the last 25 years of her life, versus somebody who actually comes from inland, happens to be an Egyptian who grew up in the Nile Delta, in the Nile southern area, but who now works in the marina or works on fixing boats or whatever. That these people are together with a common, if you will, well-being and community. I think that's something that's really important.
If we look again at the younger generation saying we're lonely, and then we look at the politics around the world, the polarization, whether you look to what's happening in Africa, whether you look to what's happening in the region, whether you look to the US or the UK or Europe, with all that polarization and with social media in all of that, you know, people more connected than ever digitally and yet lonelier than ever. How big a part does community play in us stepping back from that? Because it feels like we need community now more than we ever have.
That's very true. I genuinely think that. And to me, community in that sense is when you get to sit down with friends physically, right? So we're not on a Zoom call together, or or texting each other or whatever. You really get to sit down without an agenda, and you're basically shooting the breeze, right? I mean, in many ways, that's a clear and that these friendships, these diverse friendships, are recurring. So that you have that almost that safe environment to fall back on, either every once in a while, because not everybody necessarily needs to have those interactions on a daily basis, or frankly every morning, right? So in many cases, people will wake up in the morning nice and early, go do some sports, and then sit around for breakfast together before they go to work, right? I've seen that. It wasn't something that was typical in my previous very hectic, city-driven, etc. life, where it was you woke up in the morning and you literally had a quick breakfast on the run, and then you were in your first meeting at 8 a.m., right? And I could see how, if you take a little bit more of that time, it could be in the morning, it could be in the evening, around a social circle in person, certainly family time, that's absolutely essential, but I'll take that for granted across the board. It really energizes you for the rest of the day. It creates for you that safe space where you can just relax, where you can share your problems a bit more openly, where you find the support circle of people who are not judging necessarily, you're not in the media, you're not on display to the whole world, and you have to show how happy you are and how cool you are and how energized you are. So I think those social pressures on people, particularly the 24/7 social media pressures, and where everybody's showing just how happy and exciting and growing and making money and all of this they are, I mean,
it's exhausting, isn't it?
I suspect it's exhausting. I don't participate in this.
Well, we look at the figures around burnout around the world. Around the world, they are, incredibly high. I think Cigna Healthcare did a study not so long ago, and 94% of people that responded to their survey around the world said they were struggling with burnout. It feels almost, when we talk about the waving, it seems such a simple thing, the waving at neighbor, but do you think almost whether it's COVID or whether it's almost innately we're beginning to understand that all of this technology and all of this connected but disconnected isn't actually very good for us? And is there an appetite, almost a longing to almost return to some very human ways of living? Again, community, again, slowing down a little bit. You said there was a strong desire within the research for people to get back to nature, where we think, it's we want to live in the bustling city, but actually that's not necessarily so great for our health.
I think that's 100% the case, and it always reminds me of this joke, which I'm not going to attempt to deliver, but of the.
I wish you would.
Of the super ambitious kind of young person who then says, has a conversation with this fisherman in a small village somewhere, right? And ultimately, he realizes that all of this hassle that he's been living through, all this stress for 50 years, to get to a point where he can live the life that the fisherman has had for the last 60 years. Is the same thing. And it really reminds me of that. I think ultimately the answer is neither here nor there. I think the answer is having the right balance and the right mix. I do think that as a young person, it's fun to go live in New York City. It's fun to go to San Francisco and start a startup. It's great to be in Hong Kong and do financial trading or whatever.
Dubai.
It's awesome to be in Dubai, and we've had all these experiences, and they're great. They really are great. But it's all about having the right doses of everything. I do think the problem with all this glamour, which is ultimately what everybody sees on social media, is you completely forget the need to reconnect with nature. And it's only in those small moments when you discover it. So, when I'm going to take a 2-week vacation or a 1-week vacation. I'm going to go to, I don't know, Bali or the Red Sea, or I'm going to go to the mountains for skiing or whatever. And in a more isolated environment, not in another sort of fashionista-driven type environment, that you realize, oh my God, no, hang on, there is something there, and I need some dose of that in my life, right? And of course, so that's for young people. I think that's definitely the case, and that resonates with my younger self many years ago. I think also with my older self, as I grow, etc., I realize that what's the essence of life at the end of the day, right? it's about putting roots down. It's about giving back to a community, and you can define community in many different ways. There are multiple communities that I have, you have, everybody has. And ultimately, the name of the game, once you pass a certain threshold, is to start giving back to that community, because that's all you leave in life at the end of the day. These communities don't tend to be in large cities. You can create them. It's a lot of hard work to create them, by the way. But in more natural environments, in environments where you have a more natural connectivity, these are the communities that need more of your giving, and these are the communities that I think one gets a lot more energy back from giving too, right? And that's what I'm discovering in my own personal journey and trying to enjoy, even though I was going
to blindside you with that question. We always ask a question on the Mental Space podcast, which is, what does mental health mean to you? So I'll ask that question, but in a way that's appropriate for this question, what are your keys of life right now?
Yeah. For me, mental health is having that family security in many ways, right? It's the ability. That's my fallback community. It's my family, right? And I mean family in the widest sense. I'm a Middle Easterner, so the word family comes with many layers and many.
Understood.
You can understand. You can imagine that. And that's really, to me, my source of mental health, mental stability, and confidence in life, right? Mm-hmm. In general, it's knowing that family is always there through ups and downs, through difficult times, through easier times, but they're always there. No judgment, no pressures, but always there to share, to laugh, to help, to support, to cry. I think that's really, for me personally, that's really, really, really what it is.
So tell me from Orascom Development's perspective, because we were talking about earlier, this notion of placemaking, of creating a community. And you said a moment ago that, it's not necessarily an easy task to create a community. And you talked about sowing seeds. What are those seeds? I mean, I'm not going to ask you to give all your secrets of success away, but what are some of those basic seeds that you think that communities need?
Yeah. So I'll say a few things on this. So agree 100% with you. It's really not easy to do that. And I'll take one dimension which I think is really important, which is time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In many communities that you see developing, particularly in larger towns and cities, you see these gated communities, right? We don't think that's the right way to live, right? Because gated community, by definition, is something that you're closing up, you're isolating yourself from the immediate environment that you're in, and you're artificially trying to very rapidly create an artificial community within that broader town, right? So there's a time component also, not only the isolation component, which is a big problem, but also there's the time component, which is very rapid in there. We genuinely believe in the organic pace of development of a community. And this is something, the discussion I always hear from our chairman, and a reminder that I hear from our chairman, or former chairman and founder of the company, who says, look, you gotta give communities time to grow. You can't just simply accelerate the growth of something that's organic, right? And I have a lot of respect for that thought, and I think it's a very accurate point of view. Of course, there's always the corporate pressures to, let's try to get that going even more rapidly. Yeah. But I do believe that there's ultimately a limit as to how fast you can try to grow a company. So just wanted to comment on this question of time. It's got to grow organically, and you got to give it time. As far as the seeds are concerned, many of the people in the business of developing communities, or developers in general, et cetera, or town builders, there aren't many town builders as private enterprises. I think we're arguably one of the very few, if not the only one, that does this on a really global scale. But in any case, many of the ones that I've seen attempt to do that focus a lot on the hardware, but not so much on the software or the soul. I don't know what you call that, the soulware. Huh? But they focus a lot on the hardware. So I'm going to have great buildings here and great malls here and amazing facilities there and 5-star hotels here and there. That's fine. That's kind of table stakes in some ways, without being too fancy. I like to say that all our destinations are flip-flop chic, but they're not kind of, 6-star, 7-star type destinations. But every community, every town has its own DNA. So there's not a right or wrong answer, but I think that more relaxed flip-flop chic is kind of fits better perhaps with this whole dimension of relax, have fun, and just be tolerant and accepting of everything and every culture. So that's one other dimension, is the focus, not so much focus on hardware, but focus on software and soulware, right? Now, so what happens? How do we try to do that? It's a great question. I think there's a couple of things that we do. Purposeful ones and others that we've stumbled upon over the years, but there's been 35 years, so it's quite a bit of learning. The first one is we've recognized very early on that you cannot and you should not segregate communities within your broader town. Right? We don't believe in that. We believe that your downtown area. So when we build our communities, we have a downtown area, right? That's the area. That's your sort of your piazza, your market square,
the heart of the city.
The heart of the city, where people, the heart of the common shared space of the city, right?
Yeah.
That is non-purposeful, right? Because you have places where you go do sports or places where you go work or whatever. But this is the one where you just hang out, right? Where those social connections, begin
Sounds
to
nice.
form. It is genuinely nice, actually. It's genuinely nice, right? So those downtown areas are meant to be, again, socio-demographically, nationality, professionally, etc., very mixed. So very purposely from the very beginning, we mix expensive with non-expensive, targeted to professionals, not targeted to professionals, etc., so that it's a place where everybody in the community comes and mixes together. It's interesting because over time, and as communities grow, you can begin to see, and that's a problem, begin to see sub-communities form and say, hey, all these newcomers, we don't want them to mix with us. So can you guys put some gates on our old, the older part of town? And we're pretty strong in saying, no, that doesn't make sense. So we'll try to curate the socio-demographic, et cetera, makeup of the place, but we're not going to start creating sub-gated communities. It doesn't work well to do that. So going back, so first of all, it's having that common space, those downtown areas, as we call them. But they could be also beach hangout areas. They can be public beaches and things like that. They can be, whatever areas that are common to everybody where we mix. So that's one of the elements and design principles that we've had from the very beginning. Of course, as your town grows, and our towns tend to grow quite a bit, you got to create multiple of these, just for convenience. So that's one. Number two, and linking to the point about multiple of these, you got to create a lot of walkable, cyclable spaces, right? So you have to be thoughtful about where do we put the homes, where do we put the hotels, where do we put the activity centers, so that people can actually, in a natural, historic, non-motorized way, get there. Why? Because when you walk, you bump into people. You bump into people, and you might do a portion of the walk with the person that you perhaps waved to in the morning, or you bumped into them earlier at work or whatever, and you get to know them. And so it's creating those serendipitous, is that the right word?
Yeah, no,
right?
It's absolutely the right word,
right? Sort of opportunities.
Yeah.
So our role is to put the seed for creating those opportunities. So we're trying to increase the cyclable paths that we have in our different communities. We're trying to create a lot of walking streets and walking areas and wider sidewalks and things like this in our community. And we're making sure to purposefully always have those community centers of activity that are within walking distance of different.
Because often you see developers, they'll look at a piece of land and they want to try and get as many units as possible out of it. It almost sounds like the space or the empty space, the spaces between, are as important.
They're actually incredibly important. And in fact, actually, one of the tensions that I like the most in whenever we're master planning a new community or a new sub-community is the tension that we have between the finance guys, right, who say, I want to increase the area that is used for development versus the design / community, or even the senior management of the company that says, no, the soul of the company is about those spaces. So, for example, when we build houses in our beach communities, we actually build a lot of lagoons with them. Now you could say, hang on, but you're wasting first, you're wasting a lot of land by using it for lagoons. Yeah. Second, it's very expensive to dredge that land to create waterways because they're not always natural lagoons. Some of them are, some of them aren't. And then the third thing that we do is we create a lot of space between houses. So if you look at our footprint and you compare it to any of the other developers in the countries where we operate, we're literally an order of magnitude away from them in terms of how non-dense the usage of land is. But we believe in that. I mean, if you don't do this, then you're back to building large cities again. And in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time, it will not be, it will not be successful. It will not be rich culturally. It will not be soulful. It will not be different in a healthy way, not just different.
You remind me of a conversation around sustainability and sustainable performance of a company or indeed of a project. And we see burnout, we see companies out there that are burning their people out, very short-term views. It seems to me, talking to you, that you take a much longer-term view. How does that feel as a company to be able to talk about things like soul and time and space, as opposed to just be talking about profit?
Yeah.
And profit.
Listen, I'll be honest with you. I think we used to be a lot better doing that than we are today, but I think we're rebalancing a little bit the pendulum. Let me walk you through this.
Yeah, do.
So when the company was founded 35 years ago, and it was basically an owner operator of the company, so the founder actually built it up himself and etc. He, I think, because of the way that he has passion for this, he really built that in. And always very often when there was trade-off between space and community and slow pace of development, etc., versus financial pressures, he by and large went for the former rather than the latter, right? The reality is, as more professional management came in, like myself, we start to rebalance that a little bit and begin to focus a little bit more on, okay, that's good, that's great, that's essential for our long-term longevity. But if we keep losing money at all, every year in, year out, we will not be able to do that. So there's a clear recognition. Now, I recognize that tension. It is a real tension. It's really complex to make it work, particularly for a company like us, where we're going, as I said at the very beginning of our discussion, to places that are so virgin, so far away from traditional existing infrastructure, that we have to build all that infrastructure. We have to be the mayors of our cities. We have to put in electricity infrastructure, water infrastructure, desalination infrastructure, sewage management, etc. Water treatment, all these things. And so how do you balance those two, right? And we've certainly purposefully and in a very aware manner, trying not to break that initial balance, that essential initial balance. We're pushing towards how do we do that in a financially smarter way, so that we can sustain, this ultimate vision that we want. The tension is absolutely there, and it's there permanently. And what I like about it is, A, we're very conscious and aware of it. B, the former chairman is still involved in things like design, which is important, which I find value adding for us, because he represents that other side to an extreme. And we try to represent a more balanced financial to design kind of environment. And then now that we've actually turned the corner, I would say, and demonstrated and built real financial resilience for the company over the last 4 years, despite extreme headwinds that we've had, we are now much more confident in the health of the company to be able to actually now do a lot more what he always wants to do, while not compromising the future resilience and the future sustainability of the company to provide those amazing communities, etc., for others. So not an easy balance to strike. You have to have some level of financial health in order to enable that long-term view. It does help that we do have a majority shareholder that is committed to a multi-decade view of many of these towns that we have. Not necessarily it's not necessarily the case that we'll keep all of those towns in our portfolio over time, but it's definitely the case that whichever ones we're keeping and whichever ones we're actually operating on or working with, we're going to try to maintain that organic, soulful, passion-oriented, and healthy environment, because otherwise we're really shooting ourselves in the foot.
It's interesting you talk about it. It's almost that it's so many companies out there and so many organizations, they shy away from that kind of tension. Sometimes it must be, no, we must all agree, and you must all agree with us, and there can be no tension. But it feels like you've got almost like a creative tension going on, which enables you to have that conversation because both are important. And I think that's almost something like we've kind of lost in this polarization of social media, is that we can have different views and we're not necessarily both wrong. We can actually be both right at the same time. And where do we come in the middle? Where do we overlap? Where do those both perspectives overlap? And that's where the real sweet spot is. I'm going to take you back one last time to mental health. And, as we look around the world, how important do you feel community is in terms of mental health, in terms of health and well-being? What have you seen from the Keys of Life report that has shaped your view on how important it is?
So a couple of things. I think you just to comment very quickly on the last question, then we'll shift to this. That tension is very real and it's very healthy. And I think one of the big culture shifts that we're trying to do inside our organization as we institutionalize it and move it away from being a family-owned business to a true multinational institution that lives is to make sure that we are able to have very, very clear and healthy tensions that are intellectual tensions, that are business tensions, but that are not personal tensions, that actually and while recognizing that they make all of us, and most important, our customers, better off than before, right? And it's a difficult thing to do, and we're going through this culture change journey, and it's a complex thing. It's a really complex thing, right? It's a lot of work, it's a lot of discussion, it's a lot of role modeling, it's a lot of time consumed, and getting it to trickle all the way down to the rest of the organization is really tricky. But it's something that we try to do on a regular basis and that we're constantly working on. It's something that we live on a daily basis, and it's not easy. To your second question, so Keys of Life, and what is it that's truly interesting here, and how does mental health fit into all of this? Mental health obviously is super important to us, particularly in our communities, as we say. And to me, the Keys of Life report and the second wave of analysis that we're doing is very indicative of the fact that unless you have that human interaction, unless you are able to create those common spaces where people come together, unless you're able to make sure that you have these very diverse people, cultures, inhabitants, if I may call it, or visitors or whatever, and give them the space to express themselves, give them the space to create those human relations and human contact, and give them the space to thrive. So, for example, one of the interesting statistics that I saw in here is that the level of productivity of nomadic entrepreneurs or nomadic employees, if I may call it, right, is actually much higher when they're able to live in a place which connects them with nature a lot more. And that resonates, very naturally with me. If when I was a kid and I'm sitting there and studying for my big kind of end of year exams, and every 2-3 hours of studies I can go down, play a game of basketball in the neighborhood, and then pop back up half an hour later and continue my studies, I'm a lot healthier, I feel a lot better, I'm able to focus and concentrate and be much more productive. And I think that to me was one of the very interesting takeaways.
I love the other statistic as well in there that basically said, if you want productivity, if you're working in a beautiful place, your productivity is much higher than if you're working in a really ugly place.
That's right.
And even more so for CEOs. So if you're a CEO and you're designing a rather miserable place of work, you're going to make less money. It always strikes me that it's always good business to be a good business.
It's always good business to be a good business. It's funny, you mentioned also this CEO thing and beyond, by the way. this whole concept of also, for example, business and leisure, is something, some people call it bleisure, I guess.
Pleasure. I was going to ask you about pleasure because it's the first time I'd read that word. Pleasure.
Yes. And
that shows how our life is blending.
It's not a mispronunciation of pleasure.
Pleasure. No, tell me more about that, because it's it almost seems like an apt and fitting, because the work and life are blending so much now. We used to talk about work-life separation. That's getting much more blurred these days.
It is getting more blurred these days, and of course, remote work has enabled that in a very strong sense. I think also, just simply, like I said, the realization that it's fine to be on, I don't know, in the Googleplex or in the, where they've actually attempted to create that work, life, play environment. Except the problem is, for 90% of the other companies around the world, it's impossible to create that just from the physical location where you are, or the ability to create this. And so there's clearly those companies realized it a long time ago, that this whole mixing of business and leisure, but now we've taken it to a whole different level, where now we get the travel component also associated with it, right? Because in the old days, you couldn't do the remote work as easily or as conveniently. Today, now this is much more acceptable. And so what you see very much out of the report, and I think all of us feel it when we do it, is if I'm going to go on a business trip, and I can tag onto it a couple of days of maybe one day of culture exploration and another day of some sports or well-being or new experiences. I can go on a crazy hike, or I can maybe go try kite surfing, or maybe I'll go do some fun things with some old friends that I hadn't connected with from that country. It just changes my level of energy, my level of productivity, my level of presence when I'm actually working so much more. Now, I say this, but I don't do this as much as I should, right? And it's really terrible because, especially that we have these 11 magical destinations, and, I wish I could.
You've got no excuse.
I've got no excuse. I really, really have no excuse whatsoever. My only excuse perhaps is my family, to be honest. And I just try to spend as much time as I can back with them. But that's, I think, more of an excuse than a reality. And I
feel the family are now saying, "Well, take us with you."
Yeah, exactly. Either take us with you, or frankly, we're quite happy when you're not around. So you should extend your business trips a little bit longer. But it's true that every time I've taken the half a day or something. The other day, or a year ago or so, I was in Montenegro to visit our destination, and for whatever reason, there was a meeting on Friday, and then there was another meeting on Monday. So I ended up having the weekend in between, and it's just, it wasn't convenient to return back home. And so I decided to stay, and I just rented a motorcycle, and I drove around pretty much the entire country. How amazing is that, right?
Sounds very cool.
You get to see wonderful nature, you get to discover amazing people, and you get to understand a lot better the community in which you want to, and the flavor that you want to add in your own communities that links to the country. How great is that? And why wouldn't I be doing this on a much more consistent and regular basis going forward? I should.
Perfect. You have been very generous with your time. Obviously, time is something that you value in your communities. So before I let you go, just give me one or two more of those seeds, those fundamental things that you think we as communities around the world need to just value more.
I think another one of those seeds that we feel strongly about and that we try to do, we call it placemaking. I call it more enriching local culture, is just the diversity of culture that you have to let flourish in your communities, in your towns. So what do I mean by that? Music, art, cinema, literature, these are not aspects. First of all, these are unfortunately in many places with the new sort of, social media oriented, etc., short attention span that's happening, especially with younger people. These are perhaps skills that are migrating, or that are, I won't say slowly dying, but certainly I have to imagine that if you compare the how many books a young person reads today versus how many books a young person read 20 years ago, there's probably a bit of a decline there. And so how do you actually maintain those cultural components that are truly essential in your community? So for example, one of the things we do in many of our communities is we support music, right? So in Switzerland, we have these concerts. We've built a concert hall in our small town. I mean, this was a farming village historically, right? And used to be 20 years ago, a military base. And now it has one of the nicest concert halls, and some of the highest quality orchestras come on a regular basis throughout the season to perform there, right? Yeah. How great is that to maintain or to create or to seed seeds of culture?
Well, the moments where you bring
music.
people together as well.
Bring people together, bring new aspects of culture that they may not necessarily have had the exposure to. Yeah. In El Guna, we are now running the 7th edition of the Guna Film Festival, where we encourage a lot of independent movies to be made. We have this platform called Cine Guna, where we have young starting writers, script writers, producers, directors, etc. And we give them, through workshops, we coach them, we teach them, we bring them in touch with investors or producers or whatever, so that they can actually try. And then we feature their movies in the film festival among many others, etc. So how do you maintain? In Montenegro, we nurture a lot of the local artists. So we have every week we have sort of local art and local sort of market kind of places. For people within the neighboring communities to come and share their work and etc. So I think that's one of the secrets of success also, if I may call it that way, is we take a genuine interest and we invest our hard-earned money into that broader culture dimension, be it all the traditional forms of culture. Yeah. We think this is truly important in our communities also. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, guys, the Keys of Life report is fascinating. There are 2 editions of it. Check out the show notes because we're going to include the report in it. If you've enjoyed this conversation half as much as I have, then remember to subscribe. It helps us bring you more of these conversations, more than you know. If you're watching on YouTube, the button is right there. Just press it. But fascinating conversation, Omar. Thank you so much for sharing your time with you. Yeah. And thank you from the mental space. Thank you.